What's happening? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show, DRF TV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle at DRF Inside Post, or the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This is the recap edition. We go back and take a look at the past weekend's racing action. This happens to be for the weekend of September the 22nd. A couple of grade ones from Parx, a number of other graded stakes races. We'll go over a very brief stakes montage will be involved. We'll give you the weekend's best as far as Beyer speed figure performances are concerned, and give you a little bit of a heads up of what's to come this upcoming week on DRF TV. If you listen to this in podcasts like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify over on YouTube. Click the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up. If you're over on iTunes, write us a review. Give us a positive rating. Greatly appreciated. Let's dive right into it with one of the grade ones. To start with the girls, the most controversial race of the weekend, no question about it. The grade one Cotillion, 1 mile and a 16th for 3-year-old fillies. You had a field of 8 in here, but really this race boiled down to Monomoy Girl. This was an instance where she is the leading light as far as 3-year-old filly divisional honors is concerned, just based on the overall body of work, what she's accomplished this year. Grade 1 Ashland, Grade 1 Kentucky Oaks, Grade 1 Acorn, Grade 1 Coaching Club American Oaks. This really is one of the better 3-year-old campaigns we've seen from a filly in recent memory. But you had other legitimate contenders and legitimate threats, alternatives, if you will, if you didn't love Monomoy Girl and you weren't enamored with her at the 1-2 odds that she went off at. Most notably Midnight Bisou, as well as Wonder Godot. And you also had Separation of Power stretching out. Ultimately, we got an exciting race and we got a controversial finish. First things first, let's take a look at the stretch run of this year's Cotillion.
To open up. Midnight Bisou, the only one in with a chance now on the inside of Separation of Powers, has dropped back to third. It's Monomoy Girl, last furlongs on the inside. Here comes Midnight Bisou. Monomoy Girl drifting in just a bit. Midnight Bisou will have to switch to the outside. Midnight Bisou is coming on. Monomoy Girl digs in. Midnight Bisou on the outside, a late surge. Monomoy Girl, Midnight Bisou, Monomoy Girl. Break out the crown and let the coronation begin. Monomoy Girl is simply...
Monomoy Girl finishes first, is placed second via disqualification. Midnight Bisou is placed first, and she is the winner. She gets the job done at odds of 4-1. Monomoy Girl finishes second via disqualification at odds of 1-2, and Wonder Godot rounds out the trifecta at odds of 6-1 for Mark Cassidy and John Velasquez. Let's take a look a little bit more at the winner as far as connections are concerned. Midnight Bisou, she is 5 of 10 lifetime, 10 times in the money. She has never been off the board from 10 lifetime starts, $1.3 million in career earnings. Owned by Bloom Racing Stable, Madaket Stables LLC, and Allen Racing LLC. Trained by Steve Asmussen, bred by Woodford Thoroughbreds in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Mike Smith, and you can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. She's by Midnight Loot out of a Repent mare named Diva Delight. Let's get down to the figures, the nuts and bolts, before we dive into the actual disqualification. Monomoy Girl and Midnight Bisou both earned 101 Beyer speed figures. Again, Beyer speed figures are based on final time. Timeform US, they incorporate pace and also a few other different little things here and there. But ultimately, when you factor in the pace, Monomoy Girl earned a 122 Timeform US rating, and Midnight Bisou earned a 120. Then you have a pretty significant drop in both figures back to the third and fourth place finishers. Wonder Godot an 84 Beyer, Separation of Powers an 84 Beyer. From a Timeform standpoint, Wonder Godot a 109 and Separation of Powers a 111. When you look and see how fast the girls came home, Monomoy Girl comes home in 32.83. Midnight Bisou comes home in 32.36. Let's discuss the disqualification. I tweeted about it on Saturday immediately after it happened. I don't agree with the call, but it's not an outrageous call whatsoever. And I don't think anybody can sit there and stomp their feet and say, this is an outrage, this is ridiculous, da-da-da-da. At the end of the day, Monomoy Girl drifted in front of Midnight Bisou. Now, I don't think it ever... First things first, let's just go over. She drifted in, and then she drifted out. Considerably drifting out, about 6-7 paths. Midnight Bisou coming from the back of the pack, down on the inside. Once the path was taken, Mike Smith chose to get her out to the outside, and she was floated out. The ultimate margin of victory, or the difference, ended up being a neck. Could you argue that the neck could have been made up had they run in a straight line? Certainly you could. No one knows for sure, but it's certainly an argument that can be made. And as far as the reason that I said, and a lot of people came back and were like, how can you say that? How can you look at it like that? I don't think Midnight Bisou ever lost her momentum. And there was never any contact. So that's why I said I didn't agree with it. But there have been far more egregious things that have been left up, and there have been more insignificant things that have been taken down. I don't think there's any sort of real, and I said it is what it is, and there was some person on Twitter came back and they're like, oh, that's the, the sort of tagline for all of horse racing. Well, I don't know, what do you want me to say? I mean, if you watch the NFL, and I'm sure there's going to be some Yahoo that sits there and they're like, well, the NFL, da-da-da. If you watch any football, there are going to be judgment calls all the time, pass interference. Sometimes you look at it and guess what, when you slow it down, yeah, okay, maybe it wasn't pass interference, or it wasn't as bad as you had thought it was and the flag was thrown. In an instance like this, we have the luxury, and I understand, look, people like to bash stewards. I don't envy a steward's position whatsoever. They are in the ultimate thankless position where people are never going to be happy. There's always going to be somebody complaining about whatever the call is. Not everyone is always going to sit there and be like, 100% right call. There's always going to be people that complain. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people wagering on this stuff. And if you got taken down and you were on Monomoy Girl, and good, look, I had a lot of things into Monomoy Girl. All right. It is what it is. It's the name of the game. Sometimes you get taken down, sometimes you don't. I've been taken down with far more insignificant things and that certainly has ticked me off in the past. But as far as this was concerned, I wasn't surprised. I don't think she should have been taken down, but I'm not stunned. And I don't think it was an egregious move from the stewards to disqualify her. You can certainly make the case that all of that drifting around, that if they had run in a straight line, especially with the way, again, when you look at how fast they came home, where Midnight Bisou comes home fifths of a second faster, we're talking legitimately quicker, which equates to lengths. You can certainly make the case that if they stayed in a straight line, Midnight Bisou goes by and gets the job done. We'll never know, but I just don't think it is nearly as just blown out of proportion as people want to make it out to be. Let's talk about the actual efforts from the horses themselves, disqualification aside. I thought Florent Geroux gave Monomoy Girl a great ride, considering she wasn't the sharpest out of the gate. Going down the backside, she's down on the inside. There were a number of people that have said that the inside is not where you want it to be. I'm going to leave that up to you as the handicapper, because most of you know my MO as far as track biases are concerned needs to be an absolute disaster or just very, very pronounced for me to sit there and say, you know what, I'm going to make a note of that. That's up to you as the handicapper if you think the inside was good or bad. Most people are leaning toward it being bad. She was stuck down there, and going into the far turn, Flo made a very decisive move, and I thought it was probably going to be the winning move, where you don't want to wait too long and have any of those other horses that are down in and around there start to pack it in. Don't leave any sort of question about it. You're on arguably the best horse. Let's go. Take the race to everyone else. Make them come and catch you. I thought that was the perfect move. And as far as handling her down the lane with all the drifting, it's not like he was contributing to it as far as going in one direction and she kept going the other. He was trying to straighten her out, and she just got a little bit drifty. That has to be a little bit of a concern, considering this is her first start in a little while, and now we're going to lead into the Breeders' Cup Distaff, and you're still probably looking at a short price on her. You know, if she makes the front, is she going to get a little bit drifty? Who knows? Talent-wise, I think she is every bit as good as any of the other 3-year-olds, if not better. And she still deserves 3-year-old filly champion, in my opinion. Unless something crazy happens in the distaff. And I shouldn't say crazy. Unless something like Midnight Bisou winning the distaff, and then all of a sudden, things get a little bit gray. We had that a number of years ago with Princess of Silmar and Beholder. Another story for another day. As far as Midnight Bisou is concerned, thought this was a very nice effort, considering she was coming from a little bit off the pace. She made up that ground, and she was out in the clear, well off the rail. Now, again, that goes back to you as a handicapper. You need to make the call. If you thought outside was good, then for the majority of this run, she was on the best part of the racing surface, opposed to Monomoy Girl. I like the way that she finished, and she showed that this mile and a 16th is very good for her. I'm still not totally convinced that a mile and an eighth is her bread and butter. I think she is better going slightly shorter. Of the two, I think Monomoy Girl would have a better chance in a race like the Distaff than Midnight Bisou would. I would still love to see Midnight Bisou turn back. I know that's not going to happen. For a race like the Filly and Mare Sprint, I think she would fit that thing to a T. I know it's not going to happen. Some folks have talked about the speed figures, how these are very clearly the fastest that these girls have run so far. It's that time of year, though, and that's why I don't look at a giant jump up from a figure standpoint. It wasn't giant. Monomoy Girl had run a couple of 98s in her most recent start. She paired those up, and now she moves up to a 101. I think this is probably where they live, in that low 100 range, high 90 sort of, 98, 99 spot. Is that going to be good enough to beat Abel Tasman and good enough to possibly beat Elate if she gets to the distaff? Who knows? We'll find out. We still have a few more weeks. There are going to be some more horses that show up between now and the first Saturday in November for the Breeders' Cup. I just think there's a real scenario where, you know what, Monomoy Girl, I think she's better suited at a mile and an eighth against better horses than Midnight Bisou is, even having seen Midnight Bisou run as well as she did here on Saturday. The top two both ran very well. Everyone else a little bit suspect, a little bit lackluster. Wonder Godot, she was out in the clear throughout. She finished willingly, but she was no match for the top two. I think this is where she stacks up as far as talent is concerned against them. Mark Cassie has said it's a possibility that she runs in the distaff, but they're going to let her kind of tell them if they choose to go that route. She's going to go to Churchill Downs, and obviously the top two, Midnight Bisou and Monomoy Girl, they're both being pointed to the distaff. Separation of powers, to me, is one of the other interesting ones that maybe you would want to make note of going forward. I'd love to see Chad turn her back for the filly and mare sprint because, again, that division, a little bit topsy-turvy. I understand the top two are basically the Baffert horses, Dream Tree, as well as Marley's Freedom. But I think separation of powers, this is that time of year. Going back to what I was speaking of with the speed figures, these girls are going to make that big jump forward. 3-year-olds, they're getting older. They're starting to totally fill out and totally mature. Not totally. Obviously, we've talked about it in the past that you go into the 4-year-old and ultimately early 5-year-old. But for what we are considering at this point, 3-year-olds, they continue to improve and they continue to mature. This is when I think you do get that next little bump forward, and we'll talk about that more with the boys in the Pennsylvania Derby. But ultimately, the rest of the field, I don't have a heck of a lot to say. Monomoy Girl and Midnight Bisou, they are both very, very talented. I think they're probably the two best 3-year-olds that we have as far as the fillies are concerned. I think Monomoy Girl is still better than Midnight Bisou regardless of this outcome, but I don't find it just absolutely, crazy that this was the call that was made. I don't think she should have been disqualified, but I don't think it was a bad call either. I can understand it entirely considering she drifted around as badly as she did. Midnight Bisou is placed first. She wins the Grade 1 Cotillion at Parx with a 101 Beyer and a 120 time form US rating. Monomoy Girl disqualified from first, placed second with a 101 Beyer and a 122 time form US rating. Sounds like the top two, they could have another rematch on their hands coming up in a few weeks at the Breeders' Cup Distaff. But the difference this time around, they'd be facing a number of other salty older girls. Grade 1 Pennsylvania Derby, 3-year-olds, a mile and an eighth on the main track. The return of McKinzie along with 8 other 3-year-olds. That was really the story. What kind of McKinzie would we get? Off of such a long layoff, we've come to expect Baffert's horses to fire big off of long layoffs. Saturday was no different. You had some interesting alternatives, whether it was Hofberg, whether it was Instilled Regard, Bravazzo, Mr. Freeze, Axelrod, you name it. There were other horses that you could go with. But McKinzie, say what you will. When Baffert has them ready to go, they're ready to go, and that's what we got on Saturday. McKinzie gets the job done. Here's the stretch run of the Pennsylvania Derby.
Long shot, trigger warning together at the top of the stretch. They come off the turn, and McKinzie has the lead. It's McKinzie, but here comes Axelrod. He'll try to make a race of it on the outside. Furlong to go. McKinzie is in front. Axelrod set down by Joe Bravo. Mike Smith working on McKinzie. McKinzie holding on. Axelrod is full out. McKinzie is clear as they come down to the finish. Baffert, Smith, McKinzie. They've done it. McKinzie has it by 2.
McKinzie at odds of 2-1 as the favorite gets the job done by a length and 3/4 over Axelrod, who runs a very, very strong second at odds of 10-1. And trigger warning, he rounds out your trifecta at a giant price, the longest shot in the field, 81-1. Let's take a look at McKinzie a little bit deeper. McKinzie is 4 of 5 lifetime, 5 times in the exacta, over $900,000 in career earnings, owned by Watson, Pegram, and Whiteman, trained by Bob Baffert, bred by Summer Wind Farm in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Mike Smith, and the pedigree is at the bottom of the horse card. He's by Street Sense out of a Petionville mare named Runway Model. Nuts and bolts, 107 Beyer, 104 Beyer for McKinzie and Axelrod. Time form U.S. ratings of 129 and 127 respectively. Trigger warning earns a 94 Beyer and a 121 time form U.S. rating. Hofberg, a 92 Beyer and a 117 time form U.S. rating. When I take a look at this race, I had questions about how far McKinzie wanted to go coming into this race. At face value, he answered them, saying, oh, you know what, distance isn't a problem. Mile and an eighth handles it very easily. Watching the replay, he's a little bit drifty down at the end. He's flashing his tail. Don't let the flashing tail be of sort of concern. This has been McKinzie from day one, where when you give him the whip, he doesn't really appreciate that. He comes home in 12:65 for his final eighth. That is faster than any other final eighth of a mile in this field. The only reason I'm not still totally convinced that a mile and an eighth or longer is really his best game is because of that little drift where I personally believe it may be he's getting a little bit tired, even though he finished as well as he did. Mike Smith would differ as far as his opinion, and that's fair. He rides the horse. He says he's still learning. That's probably 80% of him. But then when I see that Baffert says, you know what, we'll just get him home, we'll see how he's doing, and he's going to be considered for races like the Breeders' Cup Classic or the Clark Handicap, that immediately is a little bit of a flag to me in my head, saying, on the heels of an effort like this with a 107 Beyer, which at the very least makes you a fringe player to hit the board in a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic, why wouldn't that immediately be the game plan? And like Baffert said, you get him home and find out if he's okay, and who knows, maybe he still does go to the Classic. But I'm looking at it saying, wouldn't that just immediately be the plan? Unless you don't think that an extra eighth of a mile is going to be to his liking. And if you think that the mile and an eighth that we saw here on Saturday, if this is really sort of, let's say, his air quotes distance limitation, then maybe the Clark Handicap becomes a better and more reasonable goal on the sort of upcoming near future for a horse like this. McKinzie, there's no question about it. He's talented. Some people have made some noise about the Beyer, saying a 107, big number. Well, keep in mind, he earned a 101 in his most recent start, and that was back in March, early as a 3-year-old. If you just follow that natural progression from a maturation standpoint, a 107 is well within the scope of possibilities for a horse like McKinzie. He'd shown talent all along. There's no reason to believe that he wasn't capable of something like this. I thought this was a good effort. I think this is a very talented horse. I also think Axelrod's a very talented horse from Michael McCarthy. He continues to improve. And I can understand anyone that looked at that Smarty Jones, the local prep for this Pennsylvania Derby, and said, well, he didn't really beat anything in there. And, you know, is he going to be able to do that against better horses? Even though he looked very good coming home. I tell you what, when I saw the way that he finished in the Smarty Jones, considering he was stacked up behind a wall of horses, I immediately thought that's a legitimate racehorse. Then all of a sudden he comes back with an effort like this. I think he just continues to improve. He came home in 12:78, the second fastest come home time in the field. I think this is a very promising horse going forward. Michael McCarthy was quoted after the race saying, I'm proud of him. I thought he ran super. He's just getting better and better. He's taking his training much more serious now, and his confidence is through the roof. He will also be considered for races like the Breeders' Cup Classic, the Clark, or other races across the country, because we are at that sort of interesting time where there are still occasionally a 3-year-old race here or there, but there are plenty of other alternatives. If you don't think, let's just say this year maybe you think the Classic is a little bit too much for him. No reason to not look for an alternative and plan for a 4-year-old and plan for a Classic run next year, which, by the way, will happen to be in their backyard out at Santa Anita. So I think you have plenty of reasons to look at a horse like Axelrod and say, you know what, he is on the upswing. This is a horse that you want to keep an eye on going forward for a very, very strong conditioner. That's a combination of trainer and conditioner. A very strong trainer in Michael McCarthy. As far as the rest of the field is concerned, trigger warning, I've maintained from jump. He doesn't want to go this far. He's a good, talented horse. I've had him in my horse watch for months now, waiting for a mile race or a mile and a 16th type of race for him. He keeps outrunning his odds. He's making the connections a ton of money. I think if they want to win some of these races, they got to go a little bit shorter with him. Hofburg, disappointing effort here. Now, I thought the fractions were pedestrian at best, 23-4, 48-4, 13-2 for 3/4. He didn't have a heck of a lot to run at, but at the end of the day, you got to do a little bit more running than you did. The 92 Beyer that he earned is a significant regression from that 100 that he earned in the Curlin Stakes. 117 time form U.S. rating. Belmont after the race, he just didn't come with much of a run. He broke a little slow, too soon to make any big plans down the road. All of a sudden, let's just say, hypothetically, you take out Hofburg. You possibly don't have a McKinzie in a race like the Classic. This weekend coming up becomes very, very big, because now maybe there isn't an elite that can get to the Breeders' Cup. We'll find out. But if you have Diversify in the Jockey Club Gold Cup and you have Accelerate out in the Awesome Again out at Santa Anita, let's just say they do what they're supposed to do. If the fringe contenders don't run well or don't perform well, whether it be a horse, let's just use the New York race as the example because they're the few that I know off the top of my head, whether it's Mendelssohn or it's Thunder Snow or someone else, if they don't come with a legitimate run, all of a sudden you're looking at it saying, outside of Accelerate and Diversify, who in that Classic, who are we terrified of? I mean, I suppose you can look at an alternative with Catholic Boy, but he's at the moment significantly slower than those top two. We have a long way to go between now and the Breeders' Cup Classic, but I'm just saying, if the fringe contenders in those races, in the Awesome Again and in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, if they don't perform well, reasonably well this upcoming weekend. All of a sudden, the Classic is getting pretty narrow as far as the top end is concerned about horses that you have to look at and say, boy, they just might just be that much better than everyone else. As far as the rest of the field is concerned, core beliefs, if you are in the camp that believes the inside was not where you wanted to be at Parx on Saturday, you want to throw him in your horse watch as well because he was buried down on the inside. He stayed on gamely at the end. King Zachary, sort of a dull non-effort from him. Bravazzo, disappointing effort. He was a little bit, well, I don't want to say a little bit. He was much more forward than he is accustomed to being, but he started doing what he was doing in the Travers, going into the far turn, where Luis Saez was all over him. In the Travers, he started backing up, but then he rallied again on at the end. Unfortunately, we didn't get that rally at the end. A disappointing effort from him, disappointing effort from Mr. Freeze as well. You got to give Mr. Freeze a little bit of, you can't give him a full mulligan, but he was spun about 10 wide going into the first turn. That's not ideal. And Instilled Regard was god-awful. He just never was involved, and you just hope that everything is okay. This was his first start on the East Coast for Chad Brown. Long story short, McKinzie, he's back. He's better than ever. 107 Beyer, 129 time form U.S. rating. We'll find out. If he goes to the Classic, some people will be interested, and who knows? Maybe I'll revisit my, this piece here in the recap, and I'll think about it a little bit more, and I'll be a little bit more inclined to think that an additional eighth of a mile won't be a problem. I still question how far he wants to go, and if you're looking for a horse that maybe not this year for the Classic, but maybe as a 4-year-old and give him some more time, maybe a horse like Axelrod, the runner-up in this race. Maybe he continues to improve from Michael McCarthy. This was a good effort from him to run second as well. McKinzie gets the job done in the Grade 1 Pennsylvania Derby. Let's go to Belmont Park for the Grade 2 Kelso. This is a one-turn mile, and historically this has been sort of a de facto prep for a race like the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Now, in certain years, it's more important and more pressing than others, because we have had instances, whether it's at Santa Anita or it's at Keeneland or it's at Del Mar, that the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile is run going 2 turns. This year, though, when the Breeders' Cup is at an event, or a venue, rather, like Churchill Downs, where it's a one-turn mile, a race like the Kelso becomes that much more important, and perhaps and could potentially have certain horses point to this race as their stepping stone. This year, the notable entrant was Battle of Midway for Jerry Hollendorfer. Coming to the East Coast, they wanted that one-turn race to get him ready for a prep and get ready for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Unfortunately for them, they had a few things go against them on this day, on Saturday afternoon. Here's the stretch run of this year's Kelso.
Sunny Ridge is going to come wide. Timeline cuts the corner. They're into the stretch. And it is Pattern Recognition. Still there. Battle of Midway. In a bit of traffic there and not going to get there today. But Sunny Ridge is in with a shot now. And here comes Sunny Ridge on the outside. Trying to run down Pattern Recognition. These two down to the line. Timeline. Third Pattern Recognition is going to hold them all off. And win the Kelso.
Pattern Recognition gets the job done for Chad Brown at odds of 5-1, followed up by Sunny Ridge at odds of 5-1, who runs second, and then at odds of 6-1, another Chad horse, Timeline. He rounds out your trifecta, a very juicy trifecta. If you played it for 50 cents, comes back $82. The favorite at even money, Battle of Midway, is out of the money, runs fifth. Let's take a look at Pattern Recognition. He is 4 of 10 lifetime, 9 times in the exacta, just under $380,000 in career earnings, owned by Klarovich Stables Incorporated and William H. Lawrence, trained by Chad Brown, bred by Ocala Stud in Florida. Ridden to victory by Tyler Gaffalione, and you can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He is by Adios Charlie out of a high cotton mare named Almost Valentine. Let's talk about the figures. Pattern Recognition earns a 101 Beyer and a 122 time form U.S. rating. Sunny Ridge a 100 Beyer and a 121 time form U.S. rating. And Timeline a 99 Beyer and a 121 time form U.S. rating. There are some important handicapping pieces that need to be thrown into your sort of brain when thinking about this race and looking at horses exiting it. First things first, Timeform US had the quarter and half mile splits, both color-coded blue, meaning in theory it's favoring horses on or near the early lead and compromising those coming from off of it. That would play into the hooves of Pattern Recognition and play against both Sunny Ridge and Timeline. Taking it a step farther, Timeform US, had the main track at Belmont Park color-coded red, bright red, meaning it was intensely speed favoring that day at Belmont, and I believe every single main track race was won in gate-to-wire fashion on Saturday afternoon. Pattern Recognition went right to the front and didn't stop, and when you see the fractions were soft, combining that with the way that racetrack was playing, other horses essentially had little to no chance, most notably Sunny Ridge and Timeline. Now, when you go and watch the replay in that stretch run again, Sunny Ridge loomed up like he was going to go right on by, but pattern recognition had plenty left in the tank. This, to me, was not an issue of Sunny Ridge hanging. This was just pattern recognition having a little bit more left. I think both he and Timeline was in a little bit tight down on the inside, but more so Sunny Ridge. This was a sneaky big effort for Sunny Ridge if you believe the fractions and you believe the way that the racetrack may have been playing. I think he's one that you absolutely have to throw in your DRF horse watch. I did the same with Timeline simply because of the dynamics of this race. Pattern recognition, though, visually, he looked very good out there. And if you think this is an instance where this is a horse that it's just taken him a little while, Chad Brown may mention he's had a number of injuries during his career. If you think he's finally just putting it all together, all of a sudden he becomes an interesting alternative if you're looking at a race like the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. You know Catalina Cruz is going to take his money. Maybe if a horse like Promises Fulfilled goes there, or if Forense Fire, the 3-year-olds taking on Elders, they'll take some money. Pattern recognition, he's an interesting sort of candidate for a spot like that, but I think you have to keep in mind that it seems like on this day, he had everything go his way. Sunny Ridge, I don't think he's a Breeders' Cup type horse, but he is a cool horse. I've always been a fan of his. There are spots for him. Timeline, he has been sort of his potential, early on it looked like he could be anything. And as time has gone on, it just doesn't seem like he's gotten any better. We'll find out. Maybe this is an instance where he's starting to put it all together. He's certainly not a Breeders' Cup type, but there could be races for him down the road. No Dozing. I think he's exposed at this level. I don't think this is what he is. I tried to give him a chance in the Forego. Didn't work in this spot here. Perhaps he had a little bit of the track go against him, but keep in mind, he was the one that was up just next to pattern recognition. So in theory, he should have had most of these things going his favor. He ended up fading badly. I don't think he's quite this good. We have to discuss Battle of Midway. And I'm going to do this as delicately as possible. And I say delicately, I'm not trying to insult anyone. But when I look at Battle of Midway, the story behind him, if for some reason you are unsure or you don't know the situation, he was retired following his victory in last year's Breeders' Cup. He won the Dirt Mile. He went off to stand, and he's not infertile, but he is subfertile or something along those lines. I don't know what the actual term is, but he's not firing on all cylinders as far as that sort of career is concerned. So they took him back and brought him into training again. Now, we've seen it a number of times. Many times when you let a horse down and they go and they're being prepped for a new career, it's difficult to just get them all the way back to what they once were. But that, to me, is actually where the real crux of the sort of thing with Battle of Midway comes down to. How good was he actually? If we're just calling a spade, and we're just looking at it from a figure standpoint, I know he won the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. I get that. When you go through, I'm going to read off his 10 most recent Beyer speed figures. Or his 11, if you include going all the way back and including this race on Saturday. Battle of Midway, he went from 80 to 84, 88, 91, 94, 81, 101, 92, 108, which came in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, 89 in his first return race, which is fine, give him that one, and then a 97 here. Now, if you think that the third start off the long layoff is going to be when you get the best Battle of Midway, that's totally fair, and it'll probably come on Breeders' Cup Saturday. My argument is strip the 108 from his PPs, which came at Del Mar, a track that he likes, which, by the way, he was on the best part of the racetrack throughout that day, as opposed to Sharp Azteca, who was down on the dead rail. Take that out. How good is this horse? He's good, but we're not talking about him as if he's, got to be viewed as the main player or one of the main players in the Breeders' Cup. He's a nice horse. If you think now he can move from this 97 that he earned on Saturday and get back to a mid-100, then yes, he certainly has a chance. But all I'm saying is based on the overall body of work, are we making too much out of a horse like this? Or are people looking at him saying, oh, well, he won a Breeders' Cup. Well, we've seen more random things happen in the Breeders' Cup. This is not necessarily an indictment on the horse, but it's just more, let's call a spade a spade. If we're, the bottom line of this game is to try to go and find value and take a look at things and try to make cases for horses. But also be honest with ourselves when we look at horses. You can make the case that he is coming up on his seasonal best effort in the Breeders' Cup, third off the bench. I wouldn't even doubt that. But is he going to get back to a 108? Because that's what it's probably going to take to win the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile this year. And if he can't, let's just say he improves. Let's say he gets to a 101. How good is he actually? I just wonder if the narrative for a horse like Battle of Midway has sort of exceeded his actual credentials. That's all. And who knows? Maybe he'll go out there and win the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. But I just look at him and I go, how good are you actually? Did you deserve to be even money in this race? Against a decent enough field? Who knows? Pattern recognition. It looks like on paper he had everything go his way based on Timeform US. They incorporated the slow fractions as well as the intensely speed-friendly nature of the main track at Belmont. He ran very well, though, and if you think he's finally got it all together from a physical standpoint, maybe there are bigger and better races for him. If it's not a race like the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, keep in mind the final Grade 1 of the year in New York is the Cigar Mile at Aqueduct. That's a one-turn mile, so maybe that's an option for a horse like Pattern Recognition. He gets the job done over Sunny Ridge and Timeline. Those are two names that I would strongly encourage you to throw in your DRF Horse Watch. Pattern Recognition wins this year's Kelso. The last race from Parx that we'll take a look at from Saturday, the Gallant Bob. This is 3-year-olds going 6 furlongs on the main track. And it's a really interesting race because Forense Fire is the big name in this group. And you know what he's capable of on his best day. He showed that beautiful, beautiful performance in the Dwyer at Belmont Park a few months back. Then he came back with a really strong effort in the Allen Jerkins up at Saratoga. The difference, though, with those two races opposed to this race on Saturday, those races were contested at a 1-turn mile and 7/8 of a mile. This race was at 6 furlongs. The question was, would he be as effective at 6 furlongs? Well, he was as effective, but then there was also a little bit of an interesting situation that happened in the stretch run. We'll talk about that in a minute. Here is the stretch run of the Gallant Bob.
And Forrest is given way 3 abreast now at the top of the stretch. 7 trumpets on the inside. Forense Fire is in between. And Where She Told Me to Go running a big one on the far outside. Inside the final 8, 7 trumpets gives way. It's now down to Forense Fire and Where She Told Me to Go. They're headed in for the lead with a 16th to go. Forense Fire the inside. Where She Told Me to Go on the outside. Down to the finish, it's Forense Fire. Forense Fire prevails and wins it by a neck.
Forense Fire gets the job done at odds of 7-5 over the 17-1 shot. That is Where She Told Me to Go. And Where She Told Me to Go was not pleased with Errata Ortiz or Forense Fire being down to the inside, tried to take a bite, didn't get the job done, and ultimately didn't prevail. Runs second again at odds of 17-1. 7 trumpets runs third, rounds out your trifecta at odds of 6-1. Let's take a look at Forense Fire a little bit deeper, shall we? Forense Fire is a 3-year-old. We know that already. He is 6 of 13 lifetime, over $1 million in career earnings now at this point. Owned and bred by Mr. Amore Stables in Florida, trained by Jason Service, ridden victory by Arad Ortiz Jr. And the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card, he's by Poseidon's Warrior out of a Langfier mare named My Every Wish. From a figure standpoint, a little bit light as far as Forense Fire is concerned. We know he's capable of a triple-digit Beyer on his best day. He earned a 98 here along with Where She Told Me to Go. They each earned 118 Timeform US ratings. I think it's difficult not to acknowledge the fact that the top 4 finishers were basically 1, 2, 3, 4 throughout, something that you're going to want to factor in. But I think it is interesting and a positive to note that Forense Fire broke like an absolute shot, and this is a horse that traditionally, or historically anyway, has done his running from well off the pace. If all of a sudden he can stay closer, and this pace was not fast by any stretch of the imagination, the opening quarter was 21-4, then you had Forrest who went out there and just streaked off to the front end. But the half mile was 45-4, so that's a tepid 6 furlong number. You would imagine in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, that's going to be sub 45, I would imagine, or at least probably closer to 45 than anything. But the fact that he can be closer, that's a very positive piece. Forense Fire, this was a nice effort from him. He popped back to his left lead at the end, but that was, I think, solely because he was about to get bit by a horse on the outside, which that happened twice at Parx on Saturday. I think it's a hysterical video when you take a look at it, and believe Barbara Livingston has a picture of it up on Twitter if you go over to her Twitter feed. I thought this was a really good effort from Forense Fire, all things considered. He came home in 12:81. Where She Told Me to Go came home in 12:87. 7 Trumpets came home in 12:94 and Engaged 13:11. I feel like there's a real scenario where Forense Fire now, there's a decision to be made, and Jason Service acknowledged as much that after the race. He said the horse ran super. We go to the Breeders' Cup now. We have the option to do the mile or the sprint. I'll talk to owner breeder Ron Lombardi, and we'll see. To me, he feels like a perfect candidate for a cross entry. You enter him in both spots, take a look at both of them. I would imagine you got to keep in mind, in the sprint, you're going to have horses like Imperial Hint, and you'll have probably a Roy H and a Ransom the Moon, and horses of that nature. Perhaps a Promises Fulfilled. In the mile, you may not have as many. You may not have as many main contenders to deal with, but you arguably have the horse that'll run in the Breeders' Cup with the most upside. That's not a 2-year-old, and that's Catalina Cruiser. So it'll be interesting to see. To me, I would still maintain that Firenze Fire is better going slightly longer and coming from off the pace as opposed to running like he did here. But it's very, very positive and very nice to know that the Connections have the option. They can run him shorter, they can run him longer, and he is effective at both of them. Where she told me to go, thought he ran just fine. Again, reluctant to change leads. He only changed leads once he went to bite the horse and the rider to the inside. It is what it is. That's just him. 7 Trumpets. Maybe you want to file him away in your horse watch. I picked him. I thought he ran really well. I thought he was going to win this race for a moment. Worth noting, though, and the reason I'm saying throw him in your horse watch, he made the biggest move of his race when he was down on the inside. And everyone seems to be of the opinion that the inside is not where you wanted to be at Parx. And for that matter, the entirety of the meeting at Parx, the inside is not necessarily where you'd like to be. So perhaps he's one that you want to take a look at again and go on from there. As far as the rest of the field is concerned, don't have a ton to offer there. I think it's just an instance where, you know what, at the end of the day, Firenze Fire is probably just the best horse in the race. Where she told me to go, ran very well, tried to take a bite out of the competition, see what I did there. And 7 Trumpets, again, he's one that maybe you want to keep an eye on going forward. Firenze Fire, it is on to the Breeders' Cup, but the question remains to be seen. Where is he going to go? Is he going to be in the sprint, or is he going to be in the dirt mile? They have options. Jason Service has done a great job with him. A good ride from Murad Ortiz Jr., breaking on top and being close to the pace. Firenze Fire gets the job done in the Gallant Bob with a 98 Beyer and a 118 Timeform US rating. Let's take a quick look at the other graded stakes race at Belmont Park on Saturday. This is the field for the Grade 3 Noble Damsel. Only a field of 4. Got scratched down. We had a couple of defections from 6 down to 4. Uni was an interesting case in this spot for Chad Brown, along with Hawksmoor. And really, you thought from a dynamic standpoint, Hawksmoor was going to have the tactical edge, and perhaps that would be all she wrote, where over yielding ground, you'd be able to get out there, set some fractions, and just have too much left in the tank for a horse like Uni to come and run you down. Well, instead, you got a visually sensational performance from Uni, the stretch run of the Noble Damsel.
As they come toward the top of the stretch, Hawksmoor, Thundering Sky, Uni's got run, and here she comes now. And she has yet to be set down, and she is looking strong. Here comes Uni. Uni to the front, and it's going to be a matter of how far from here. Uni and Joel Rosario are going to run up the score, and the Noble Damsel, oh, she was good today. Uni just rolls home in hand.
Uni gets the job done at odds of 6-5 over Hawksmoor at odds of 6-5. Thundering Sky runs third at 11-1, and Dream a While rounds out the field at odds of 3-1. Let's take a look at Uni a little bit more. Uni is 6 of 13 lifetime, over $712,000 in career earnings. Owned by Dub, Head of Plains Partners LLC, La Penta and Bethlehem Stables LLC. Trained by Chad Brown. Bred by Horace the H-Ram, I have no idea. Apologies to the breeders over in Great Britain. Ridden to victory by Joel Rosario, and you see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. She is by More Than Ready out of a Dan Silly mare named Unaided. 98 Beyer, 122 Timeform US rating for Uni, winning the Noble Damsel. Hawksmoor, a 90 Beyer, 119 Timeform US rating. When you look at this race, the fractions, again, over yielding ground, so maybe they're not as slow as they look at face value. 24-2, 48-4 for a half, 12-3 for 3/4. Uni never got out of a gallop. This was visually sensational. I thought she was tremendous in this spot. Basically like a car, in behind horses. When Rosario found that seam, about 3-path tipped out, sent her along. She was gone. Finished in 23-1. Hawksmoor comes home in 24-09. Thundering Sky 24-15, and Dream a While 24-39. I thought this was an awesome effort, and it sounds like, according to Chad Brown, that this filly could be pointed to the Grade 1 matriarch out at Del Mar. That's going to be at the end of November. He won that race last year with Off Limits. Off Limits, remember, she had a visually sensational effort, and I believe it was actually in this race last year, the one-turn Noble Damsel, and that was kind of when, bang, she stamped herself as a legitimate Grade 1 type. And remember, they had sent Uni out to Southern California, I believe, for the Gamely, which was a Grade 1 earlier this year, and either she got sick or she acted up. Whatever the case was, she couldn't run. This is an opportunity now, I think. If she runs like this out on the West Coast, she's probably going to be even money, but she's going to be a handful in a spot like that. Visually very impressive. Uni destroys the field in a scratch-riddled, admittedly small field, but Uni destroys the field in this year's Noble Damsel. Down to Laurel Park for a quick look at the DeFrancis Dash. Here was a field of 8 signed on in this spot. And favoritism landed on Switzerland for Steve Asmussen. Now, Switzerland is a horse that early in his career for Chad Brown always hinted at ability, but for one reason or another couldn't get over the hump, couldn't break his maiden, couldn't finally get to the winner's circle. He finally does. He's transitioned over to Steve Asmussen's barn, and this year, Asmussen has taken him to a new level. He was great down at Oaklawn, and he continued doing big things. He won a big stakes race down at Pimlico on the Preakness undercard. They tried the Grade 1 Vanderbilt with him most recently, and that may have been a little bit too much, a little bit too tough. Perhaps it was just Saratoga, who knows? He'd been gone since then, and he came back here as the 9-5 favorite, and he did not disappoint. Here is the stretch run of this year's DeFrancis Dash.
3 wide and third. Lewisfield is out wide. Then Lacaille out of the inside, and Always Sunshine as they straighten in the half in 45.72 into the stretch now, and it's Switzerland and Fergal Lynch driving, opening up 5 lengths. It's wide open for second. The man on the outside, and Lacaille down to the inside. Lacaille's running a big one, trying to chase Switzerland down, but Switzerland much too much for them. And the Frank J. DeFrancis Memorial Dash, Switzerland to win by 3. Lacaille was second, and then it was Sweet on the Ladies from
Switzerland gets the job done at odds of 9-5, followed up by Lockheed, who runs second at odds of 11-1, and Sweet on the Ladies rounds out your trifecta, a fine effort there at odds of 6-1. Let's take a look at Switzerland. Again, he's trained by Steve Asmussen. You can see he's 5 of 13 lifetime. He has also finished second or third on 5 other occasions. Over $437,000 in career earnings. Owned by Woodford Racing, LLC. Trained by Asmussen. Bred by Branch Family Trust in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Fergal Lynch. And you see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He is by Spitestown out of an Indian Charlie mare named Checkers. Excuse me. 103 Beyer for Switzerland, winning this year's DeFrancis Dash. Came home in 11.91. Lockheed gets a 98 Beyer, comes home in 11.78. And Sweet on the Ladies gets a 93 Beyer, comes home in 11.60. Everyone else considerably slower and farther back. Considering the way this race was run from a pace standpoint, I thought this was a pretty darn impressive effort from Switzerland. Fractions of 22-4, 45-3, stops the clock in 9 flat. We don't have Timeform US figs just yet. Those will be up, I'm sure, later on in the week, and you can head on over to timeformus.com, pull up the charts, and find that number for yourself. This was a very, very strong effort from this horse. He went on. He won by 2 3/4 lengths. He was late with the lead change, which is a concern for me. But he's the kind of horse where I do wonder, maybe the Breeders' Cup's a little bit tough, but if you told me that they chose to go there, which I don't know that they're going to, there hasn't been any indication that they would or wouldn't consider it. If you told me he went there, I don't think he is by any stretch of the imagination one of the most likely winners. But at 20-1, with the speed that he has, and he has also shown that ability to press a pace, he's also won over a wet track. I think you could convince me to take a flyer on a horse like this. I don't think he's as talented as Imperial Hint. Heck, he might not be as talented as a Ransom the Moon or a Roy H or any of those horses. But I think there's a scenario where a horse like Switzerland could outrun his odds at a big, big number in a race like the Breeders' Cup, should they choose to go there. Now, there has not been, and again, any indication, nothing filed through DRF.com just yet. But Switzerland, maybe that's a name to keep an eye on. Again, didn't like how late he was with the lead change, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He finished very, very well. He has big speed. He's shown the ability to sit off of the pace and be effective as well. Switzerland, a very impressive effort in the DeFrancis Dash, and who knows, if he shows up in a race like the Breeders' Cup, you could do worse with the 20-25-1 shot than a horse like Switzerland. He earns a 103 Beyer, winning this year's DeFrancis Dash. And the last race we'll go over here for the recap portion anyway, on the recap edition, is the 8th race from Belmont on Sunday. This is the field for the Gallant Bloom. 6.5 furlongs for fillies and mares on the main track at Belmont. You had a field of 7. There was no real overwhelming favorite. I guess Lewis Bay would fit the mold at 9-5, but we know Lewis Bay. Lewis Bay is a nice filly, but there are instances where when she's one of the favorites, you got to take a shot against her. Outside of that, you had a number of ways to go. This was a very exciting race. You had a few horses right there at the wire. Ultimately, Union Strike gets the job done. Here's the stretch run of the Gallant Bloom.
Going while Union Strike rides the rail and begins to move too, and Your Love is coming up on the outside. They're into the final furlong. The one to catch is Kirby's Penny, who leads the way over Your Love, who's closing on the outside. Union Strike is coming up the rail. Highway Star is in behind them. Here's Your Love on the outside of Kirby's Penny, and Union Strike driving through on the inside, and Union Strike's gonna do it. Riding that rail to victory over Your Love.
Union Strike at odds of 6-1 gets the job done with Jose Ortiz aboard, a half length ahead of Your Love at odds of 7-1, who was a half length ahead of Kirby's Penny at odds of 9-1. If you played the trifecta for 50 cents, comes in just under $150. Let's take a look at Union Strike. Union Strike is 3 of 11 lifetime. 3 other instances in the money, $537,625 in career earnings. Owned by Mick and Wendy Ruiz. Trained by Steve Asmussen, bred by Pollock Farms, Brian Comm, Taylor Brothers Property et al. In the state of Kentucky, and ridden to victory by Jose Ortiz, the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. She's by Union Rags out of a Smart Strike mare named Classic Strike, 92 Beyer for Union Strike, winning this year's Gallant Bloom, 91 for Your Love, 90 for Kirby's Penny, 86 is for Still There in Holiday Disguise. Union Strike, talk about just everything working out. You look at those fractions, and they were hot and contested fractions, 22-2, 45 flat, 8-4 for 3/4 final time, and 15-1. She's coming from off of the pace. She glues herself down to the inside. Jose Ortiz is able to shoot up there. There's a little bit of contact. She gets stepped on at one point about the 3/16 pole by Still There, but Union Strike is able to go on and prevail. This was a strong effort from her, finished in 29:37. Scott Blasi, the assistant to Steve Asmussen, said that the cut on her leg from being stepped on at the 3/16 pole seems to be superficial. Doesn't seem like it's any big deal. And it seems like, speaking of the Breeders' Cup, it's definitely a possibility off this race today, according to Scott Blasi. Again, very impressive effort from Union Strike. If you think you're going to get some pace, additional distance for her shouldn't be an issue. Going out to 7/8 of a mile, that is the distance of the filly and mare sprint. A lot of things to like about Union Strike on the heels of this, perhaps with the exception of the figure coming back a little bit on the light side, only a 92. Thought Your Love ran just as well as Union Strike, carried much more ground this time around. You could make the argument if she gets the trip that Union Strike does, and vice versa, the result is different. Your Love, this was a solid enough effort from her for Chad. This is a horse that could certainly move forward. No reason to think that there is not another race for her going forward at some point down the road. The horse that I want out of this race is Kirby's Penny. I admittedly have never been a big fan of Kirby's Penny, but when you look and see the way that this race was won and run, looking at the chart, the other speeds, she buried them. Highway Star and Lewis Bay, they're up the track. They finished 6th and 7th. Meanwhile, Kirby's Penny is only beaten a length for all the money. I thought this was a very, very game effort when you look at those fractions, and considering she was pushed on, I thought this was a really solid effort. She only earned a 90 Beyer, but I would venture a guess that she's going to have a very comparable Timeform US rating, incorporating the pace to that of Union Strike and Your Love. Kirby's Penny, probably a name you want to throw in your DRF horse watch. I also wonder if she's slightly better at 6 furlongs as opposed to 6.5 or 7 going longer. I think there's a race for her. Probably not Breeders' Cup material, but that's just my opinion. At the end of the day, the trip worked out, the ride worked out, a little bit of an instance where she got stepped on, but Union Strike prevails. A very impressive effort winning this year's Gallant Bloom, and it looks like there's a scenario where she shows up in the Breeders' Cup filly and mare sprint at Churchill Downs, and when she has run well there in the past, I believe she ran second as a 3-year-old in the 8 bells, going 7/8 of a mile. So good things coming out of that effort, and we'll find out if some of those names show up on the first Saturday in November for the Breeders' Cup. Let's throw it into this week's stakes montage as I take a look over. We've got racing from Charlestown, Laurel, Woodbine, Belmont, you name it. Not a long one, only about 5 of them. But here's this week's stakes montage.
And Late Night Powwow moves up outside of Sower, a furlong left to run in the Oaks. It's Chauncey and the hometown favorite Late Night Powwow running her down. Chauncey and Late Night Powwow slug it out. Here's Late Night Powwow alongside of Chauncey. Noses up and down. Late Night Powwow wins it for West Virginia.
Toward the top of the lane, Hello Don Julio. Cooptado running a big one on the outside. Final Copy trying to stay on but driven. And Postulation out of the inside. They're coming past the 3/16 pole now. On the outside, Cooptado's trying to get to Hello Don Julio. Hello Don Julio and Cooptado 1-2 in that last furlong. Hello Don Julio. Cooptado keeps on plugging along and trying, making inches late. Hello Don Julio. Hello Don Julio all the way. Hello Don Julio from Cooptado to win 3/4 of a length.
Looking for 8, trying to keep going. 2 in front. Melmich using all the experience that this horse has. Is it enough? Looking for 8 with the early dash. Melmich not able to do enough at the moment. And down the lane, Florida One coming back, but looking for 8 is looking to be the upset. The longest shot on the board, a length winner in the Durham Cup. Florida One second, Third, Melmich. And
3/4, 1:14.09. They're into the stretch here. And Conquest Hard Candy's got a slight lead from Lady Joan. 55 is closing on the outside. Then Tizelle Munchkin Money is next. And they're coming down to the final 16th. And 55 has taken the lead and is pulling away. Opening up as Munchkin Money takes second late. 55 scores by 2.5. Munchkin Money was second. Lady Joan was third. Self in the Ashley T. Cole. Back into second on the inside is Longshot Winston's Chance as Black Tide drifts out and starts to tire with a furlong to run, but he's still there. He's got a 3-length lead. Here comes Tapitation Red Knight. Here's Carafa on the inside with his run. It's still Black Tide, though. He's holding them all off. Black Tide still there coming down to the wire, and Black Tide's gonna do it. He held on to win.
There you have this week's stakes montage, and as we always do on the recap edition, let's give you the weekend's best performances from a Beyer speed figure standpoint, right in order. 2-year-old males on dirt, Vekoma at 86 and a maiden special weight at Belmont Park. 2-year-old fillies, Take Charge Angel, 76 and a maiden special at Churchill Downs. 2-year-old males on turf, we have a tie with Order and Law and Scrap Copper. They earned 78s in the Laurel Futurity at Laurel Park. 2-year-old fillies on turf. Monkey's Uncle is 72 in the Salima at Laurel as well. 3-year-old males, we saw them at the top, or toward the top anyway. McKinzie with a 107 in the Pennsylvania Derby. 3-year-old fillies, we saw them at the top. That's a fact. Midnight Bisou and Monomoy Girl, they earned 101s in the Cotillion. 3-year-old males on turf. Oldies but goodies, 91 in the non-winners of one other than at Laurel. 3-year-old fillies on turf, Split the Sea. 78 in an optional claimer at Woodbine. Older males on dirt. We saw Switzerland earn the 103 in the DeFrancis Dash. We just saw Union Strike earn a 92 Beyer in the Gallant Bloom. That was the fastest for the older females on dirt. Older males on turf. Hello, Don Julio winning the Laurel Turf Cup with a 98 Beyer. And the older fillies and mares on turf. Uni with the 98 Beyer and the Noble Damsel at Belmont Park. It sounds like she is on to the Matriarch out at Del Mar at the end of November. There you have it, the weekend's best performances from a Beyer speed figure standpoint here on the Matt Bernier Show. Let's take a look at the DRF TV schedule of events for this upcoming week, a big week. You're going to have a number of stakes previews. They will all be handled by Illman and Beer. I will not be around to film those, unfortunately, on Thursday. I'll dive into that more momentarily. But you'll have all sorts of good stuff. The Jockey Club Gold Cup, the Awesome Again, the Chandelier, the Zenyatta, the you name it, you've got it. The Vosburg at Belmont Park. A number of big, important final preps leading into the Breeders' Cup. You will have the Weekend Warrior, I believe, my Daily Racing Form National Handicapper Mike Watchmaker. You'll have the DRF Players Podcast. You'll have a number of good things out there over on video.drf.com or the Daily Racing Forms YouTube channel. I am flying to California on Thursday, so I will not be involved with the stakes previews, nor will there be a preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show coming up this week. I will be back in time for a recap edition next week, about the same time if you're watching live, or if you're listening to the podcast, and I'll go over all of this upcoming weekend's big racing, but unfortunately there won't be a preview edition. I did get a few sort of inquiries as far as horses that people are interested in. Hopefully down the road when the next preview edition comes, I'll be able to do that. Unfortunately, if I'm looking at the calendar correctly, I don't think there's going to be a preview edition for some time, because heading out to California this week for the NBCSN show on Saturday. I will come back, then I'll head to Kentucky for the NBC shows Saturday and Sunday. I'll be traveling on the day that the preview edition would normally come out, and then I go on vacation for a week to Scotland. So you won't have a few things for a little while. So the next time, in theory, there's a real chance that the next preview edition isn't until Breeders' Cup time. So we'll find that out. We'll get that ironed out. There will be a recap edition next week, though, of this upcoming weekend's action. So we'll dive into all that. If you've been listening to this recap edition live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, or the Daily Racing Forms YouTube channel, Facebook page, YouTube channel. We'll get to that in a minute. Thank you for doing so. If you listen to this podcast, like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, or Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. If you're over on iTunes, write us a review, give us a positive rating. Greatly appreciated. You want to follow me on Twitter, at Bernier_Matt. Questions, comments, concerns, you name it, I am over there. Thank you for watching this. Thank you for listening to this, however you digest it. Again, questions, comments, concerns, you know how to get a hold of me, or you can fire them beneath the video player on the YouTube channel. Until next time, which will probably be the recap edition next week. Best of luck however you play, whatever you play, wherever you play. It's been the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show.